Hi there. I'm Smita Murthy, managing partner at Opencliff Partners. We're a product advisory and consulting firm. We help startup founders and CEOs scale up products through advisory and interim or fractional product leadership. We augment product leaders, such as the one I'm going to have on the show today, with achieving the positive business and customer outcomes by helping them with that third party perspective that gets business cases approved. Last but not the least, we provide product managers with career advice. This podcast series focuses on cross-functional perspectives on what it takes to build successful products across different domains and industries. I interview leaders from various functions with whom I've worked with to build and launch great products and the lessons we learn along the way. Today, I'm thrilled to host my friend and colleague, Andrew Sullivan. Andrew is a 20-year product manager veteran who recently joined Wind River to lead the Linux team. He's also led product lines including data residency controls for Google Cloud Platform, McAfee's Total Protection Service that we both managed at one point, and ePolicy Orchestrator, Google Workplace, third-party app controls, and AT&T's first broadband service, a business DSL offering launched way back in '99. Andrew lives in beautiful San Francisco with his wife Becca and Hank the Great Dane. Is a frequent volunteer in San Francisco's civic and cultural scene, speaks fluent Japanese, I can endorse that, and plays electric bass. Andrew, so happy to have you here. Our relationship goes back 15 plus years,
if my math is right. At least 15 years.
At least 15 years. And, before we started recording, we were just talking about the fact that how it was different when we did product management before COVID and how it is now after, where things are all 100% remote. So we'll get to that in a second. But before we do that, let's start with a fun fact about you.
Okay. First off, hi, thank you, Smith, so much for having me on. Yes, I'm Andrew. We've worked together, Andrew Sullivan. We've worked together for many years. And Smitha and I think when we initially started working together, it was on Total Protection Service, which was McAfee's small business security offering that was available at that time. Think of it as VirusScan Enterprise for the tiny enterprise. I don't know if Trellix is offering something like that today. They probably are. Anyway, my fun fact, in addition to being a 20 plus year product manager, I have been active in civic affairs in San Francisco over the years. In 1999, I was the lead co-author of the charter amendment that created the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency. That is the agency that operates Muni, the municipal railway, and parking and traffic here in San Francisco. And we were able to give the municipal railway a lot of additional funding and set service standards for quality service and reliability. And I think anyone in San Francisco would tell you that Muni, as well as the rest of the transportation system here, is far, far better than it was. So that's an achievement that I'm very proud of.
Fantastic. I don't think there's too many people who can claim that. So kudos to you.
Right. If you're in San Francisco, try riding the buses on Van Ness Avenue. They have big fat bus lanes, and we were involved in that.
Lovely. Lovely. All right, let's get started on let's talk product.
Yes.
The purpose of this podcast is really to bring those cross-functional perspectives on what it takes to build successful products. If building successful products was easy, everybody would do it.
Right.
But as you and I know, it takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of data-driven decision-making. And Andrew and I, as we just talked about, share a common history of having worked in the same company. Actually, he interviewed me to take over.
That's right. I guess I did. That's right. I interviewed you to take over my role when I moved to ePolicy Orchestrator.
Correct. So he handed over his baby to me to care for. And I think it was a very successful product when he managed it, and it continued to be a successful product when I managed it. And we've had some fun travels and many things we'll get into as we talk about products. So
yes,
tell me a little bit more. So Andrew, this is like, let's talk about different aspects. Tell me a little bit more about, you know, a B2B enterprise SaaS product that you're fond of and what made it special.
Right. Well, I'll talk about the ones that we worked on, and then I can always share ones in the industry that I'm fond of too. So Smith had mentioned, and this is correct, we worked together. I initially led, and when I joined McAfee long ago, this is back in 2005, I led an offering which had several names, but it was probably best known as Total Protection Service. In those days in the Windows world, you absolutely needed a virus scanning product. There was no Windows Defender or anything. You had to have it. And most of the virus scanning products, including Virus Scan Enterprise from McAfee, were very complex and hard to use. And so this was actually launched a little before I joined, but we turned it into Total Protection Service, a very, very easy to use virus scanning, spam filtering, web filtering service where a customer could essentially subscribe and have all of their protection taken care of them with a really easy to use SaaS. We didn't even call it SaaS back then. Really easy to use web portal. And so I was involved in writing the initial PRDs. I spent a lot of time talking to small customers, mid-sized customers, even large enterprises who just didn't want to maintain servers or other infrastructure. It was very ahead of its time, because now if you tell an enterprise you need to put up a Windows server to manage something, they'll laugh at you, right? Because it's all in the cloud. But in those days, that wasn't the case. And so I spent a lot of time writing those initial requirements. And in those days, it was a very waterfall style model. We didn't call it that, but authoring very detailed documents, which turned into specifications, which turned into releases that went out maybe every 9 months to 18 months, depending. I think one of the really important keys to our success was, there were a couple things. One was the customer-facing focus, the customer, we called it customer intimacy, which is sort of a strange way to describe it. But essentially, being able to listen to the customers and understand their real pain points and their real satisfaction points, right? We spent a lot of time doing live interviews and focus groups about virus scanning and spam filtering, both of which were really hot topics at the time. Web filtering also, although that, it was only later that became a real source of threat. And so we introduced controls there too. I worked very closely with a very strong program management team to do an agile transformation after a few years. And that agile transformation made a huge difference. It's an operational thing, not a product thing exactly. But by moving from essentially, year plus lead times we went to a quarterly release cycle, and Smitha knows this very well because we did a lot of that planning together. Yep. And then later in ePolicy Orchestrator, we went to a monthly release cycle. By moving to that cycle and adopting agile principles like having a backlog, having priorities that you can believe in, being a proactive product owner, which is very different from a traditional offer manager who just is on the outbound side. Being a product owner where you're actually deeply engaged in the design and the prioritization and reviewing demos, et cetera, made it possible for us to release really critical features, everything from credit card ordering to partner management to proactive updates of the virus scan engine itself. We had live queries. This is way ahead of its time. Now, again, this is very common, but we introduced with McAfee Global Threat Intelligence live queries to the GTI database, so that if some 0-day showed up, we could tell VirusScan that this was a threat even before we were able to put it in the DAT, which was all the signatures.
Yep.
All of those capabilities we were able to introduce quickly and reliably because we had done an agile transformation. And so that worked out extremely well. And then that set us up for success later when we launched a cloud instance of ePolicy Orchestrator, which is the management platform for VirusScan Enterprise and all the advanced features, which Trellix still offers, by the way. Trellix acquired that business from McAfee. And there we were able to, again, make, we launched an MVP, but we were able to make very frequent updates so that if, for example, a customer said, hey, this UI is not working for us, we were able to update it within a month rather than have a big long lead time. Again, today in 2024, that feels very routine. Yeah. But in 2014, 2015, it wasn't. And it was a real differentiator for us.
Absolutely. That was, with our shared history, there was like so much there that we did. I think I want to highlight a couple of things. One is SaaS, like true SaaS.
Right.
It was way ahead of its time. And there are so many products I can tell you after McAfee that I've managed that claim to be SaaS, but were not truly SaaS, right? Like we define SaaS pretty simply, the purest definition, like always on, always up to date. It was multi-tenant, so it was one instance. So you updated that instance, and everybody got the latest version.
Everybody got the latest version. That was really important.
That is so important because there are too many businesses that are cloud offerings, but they're not truly SaaS, which leads to a whole host of problems, like having to upgrade every customer instance individually. So very important, fun times. Actually, you reminded me also about the agile transformation that we went through. I would say, like, I'll be the first one to say it wasn't fun when we had to do it because we had to totally shift how we were doing product management from, the traditional PRDs, MRDs, and to your point, the 9 months to 18 month cycle to something that would be released far more frequently. And we had to come up with requirements that could be built.
Right.
That was a huge change.
Yeah, Smitha, you raise a really important point about Agile. Requirements that can be built, user stories that actually are functional.
Yeah.
Right. And engineering stories, because we spent a lot of time also authoring engineering stories with our engineering peers.
Yes.
Because let's say you're building for, let's say you have a reliability expectation, right? So you're building a number of, back-end capabilities like, active design or auto failover in the cloud or anything like that. As a product manager, you have to be able to author that in a way that is both very understandable by an end user or salesperson or go-to-market person and by the engineer who's authoring it. And that was definitely a change in the style of product management from a more traditional way where you only author the customer stories and let the engineers figure out the rest. Yeah. Interestingly, a lot of places, even places that you wouldn't expect, still really struggle with that. Yes. With the idea of, having that discipline around having, what we used to call requirements at work, having something that is substantive enough that it can be built. And, I ran into this problem, and I'm sure you have too, in many different places, like in Google, for example, we weren't very agile. And so it was on myself and the other product owners to really lean into that and say, look, even if we have long lead times, we still have to author our requirements in a way that they're really functional. And that was a challenge sometimes. Yeah. But yeah, I think you're right. And yeah, this is a whole different conversation. I think what's interesting is some companies have been agile for so long, they forgot that there was a transformation, or maybe never was one because they were born agile.
Yeah. Yeah.
Other organizations were never agile or only adopted little bits of it.
Yep.
And I think that you raise a very important point that be prepared for the transformation to be painful. And especially, I think the most important thing is you have to set leadership's expectations that you're going to miss a lot in the beginning because you don't know your velocity, you don't know your capabilities, you don't yet know what a realistic schedule and a realistic estimate
velocity is for a Scrum team.
Right. Like, what is a velocity? If you don't, when you start, you cannot know your velocity.
Correct.
So for example, we ran into this in ePolicy Orchestrator when we were new at it. Yeah. We were doing in Agile, many Agile people are familiar with the story points.
Yeah.
Right. Story points are a way to it's essentially like a t-shirt size, small, medium, large, XL, but it's another way to express the same thing. And the problem, of course, is that if you haven't estimated a bunch of these already, what's large, what's medium, you don't really know.
Yeah.
And so we ran into this problem where, things were estimated way too big or way too small. And our Agile coach was very helpful and said, look, that's not a problem. You have to go through that. you have to guess wrong so you learn how to guess right. And
Right.
I think that's sometimes, sometimes executives and especially, sales leaders don't get that because they think, oh, well, you made a roadmap, can't you count on it? We'll be able, and the answer is a year from now, we'll be able to count on this roadmap.
Right.
Today, we are not.
It's very interesting. That point is very interesting because in a couple other roles that I took on after McAfee, um, I became the default agile champion, even though that wasn't something I signed up for. Smaller companies, you take on multiple roles,
Right.
and that was something that I took on. And the interesting mindset was, oh, agile, like the word that is used. This should be fast, right? So what used to take us 9 months should now be available in 3 months. So there was a little bit of that education that had to be brought across the board, to kind of talk about the long-term benefits of adopting this. And
That's right.
And not to belabor the point, but just recently I was reading an article where someone made a very strong statement that agile's dead. I'm like,
what?
Really?
No.
Because there was a reason why it was adopted as widely as it is, because with the traditional way in which we did product management, there was no predictability of when a release would actually be available, that was actually usable, and that the customer would actually adopt.
Right.
And I think in hindsight, for me at least, Agile gave us, I think it gave us a couple of different things. One, it forced us to really think about what is that valuable piece of code that needs to be written. And second, I actually want to say it gave us a lot of, we were really great at getting customer inputs, but what it really developed was empathy for what the engineers were doing, right? Which is just as important.
Just as important,
because if you have all these great requirements, but it cannot be built, or if there's a reason why something has to be re-architected to build it, without having that empathy and that relationship with the engineering team, it couldn't be done.
Right. Yeah. I maybe somebody in a blog says Agile's dead. They're wrong, of course. I think what I've seen of late is that you see a lot of these techniques. And of course, every organization or even every team will use them a little bit differently. Like there are things in Agile that don't work well.
Yep.
Right. And I think, for example, in 100% pure Agile, you're not supposed to have a roadmap because everything is exactly prioritized. And that, from a sales and go-to-market standpoint, that just won't fly. And that's okay. You just have to be able to use, we did horizon planning, which I thought worked well, where we said, okay, this horizon, we have high confidence. Next horizon, we have medium confidence. Next horizon, we have low confidence.
Yep.
And so, if you really have to commit to something a year out, fine, but then you have to assign everything to sprints. More likely, you can say, I'm going to make an estimate, which before I made an estimate anyway. We never made a guarantee.
Yeah.
And over time, those estimates get better. Interestingly, so where I am now, Wind River, I now am leading and I just joined, so I'm not yet able to take detailed Linux tech questions, although I will. But I just joined the team for Wind River Linux to lead their product management team. And we are spending a lot of time using Agile tools to plan capabilities for Linux right now. So it's very, very common that, that an organization, even a very enterprise-focused organization, will be using Agile. Now, having said that, we still have long lead times and on some items, and we still have long roadmaps for major enterprise customers, just like anybody else.
Yeah, no, makes sense. All right, moving on. This is obviously two product managers, put them in a room, and let's talk about building products. We can talk about this for days on end.
Yes.
All right. What are some key metrics you track to determine if your product is successful?
Yeah. Well, I think this is something that was very helpful in Google. We had very regular metrics reviews. And different companies and organizations are more or less focused on this. I think it's fair to say we were less focused on that in McAfee.
Yep.
But we called them inputs, outputs, and vanity, the IOV metric framework.
Okay.
So the idea was inputs are things that are under the control of the product or the engineering team. So for example, when I was working on data residency controls, one of our key inputs was, the number of engagements we had with service teams, the number of service teams that completed capability requirements, the time that it took for a service team to add proactive monitoring and auditing, because we required monitoring and auditing for every service to be able to make these commitments, right? Think about it. If you're in FedRAMP, if without auditing, what do you have, right? Nothing. You have to be able to do it. So, by the way, I was supporting FedRAMP and ITAR and some of those federal workloads as part of this capability. So those input measures are engineering inputs, program management inputs. The team velocity is an input. The output, of course, is the business outcome. So this could be this is unblocked opportunities, of course. You want to look at unblocked and enabled revenue when you're looking at a service. It could be direct sales or bookings. It could be, if you're part of a broader offering, it could be unblocked big deals, as well as customer user count, active users. Depending on if it's a UI, then you would look at things like monthly active users.
Yep.
If it's not a UI, if it's an API capability, you would look at API usage. You would look at the number of enterprises who are using it, et cetera. Like those kinds of things. Obviously, in a business, your ultimate goal is bookings. So you'll be looking at, or bookings and revenue. So you'll be looking at the impact there. In McAfee, we spent, and actually not just in McAfee, like every enterprise vendor has to look at those, bookings and revenue aren't the same because you typically book revenue ahead of time.
Yep.
And so it's very important that, in the chip world, they talk about the book to bill ratio. In the chip world, you talk about making sure that you're booking more future revenue than you're billing current revenue. That shows that you're growing.
Yep.
And then the other piece there is it's an input in the sense that it's activity, but it's an output and it's a business outcome. You would want to look at customer engagements and partner engagements, partner deals, wins. Sales teams always focus on wins, and everyone should be thinking about that. And then the vanity metrics are things that you put on a big chart to look good in a review, but you have to be able to do that. So that could be like how many millions of, how many millions of cloud projects are activated, right? Or how many tens of millions of queries to global threat intelligence have occurred in this last month. Things that aren't necessarily they aren't necessarily related to a business outcome, but you really need to be able to show that you're having that kind of big impact. And so it's important to track them all.
Very interesting. I've never heard the IOV thing.
Yeah.
I've never worked at Google, so I don't know that.
I don't know if it was a Google specific thing, but it's definitely a useful way to think about metrics.
Absolutely.
And, something else I'll point out here that is really, it's important for a product manager to think about. Everybody in the tech industry talks all day about how much they love data, and that's true. Data are very, very important, or data is very, very important, depending on how you say it, to make decisions. But our job is not just to use data. Our job is to use judgment that's informed by data. We are not, if you just simply use a formula and rank everything, you can have an AI do that.
Yep.
Right? What we do as product managers is use that data plus our understanding of the market, our understanding of customer expectations, our understanding of our team velocity and strengths and weaknesses, especially if we're people managers, to drive the ship, if you will. And so you have to do both. You have to have and use data, but you have to use that data to inform judgment.
Yeah, very, very, very true. Andrew, tell me about a time, like, what's the biggest challenge you've faced with products? What would you do differently if you could do it over?
Yeah, so I think there's a few different categories of challenges, and I'll throw out the categories and maybe pick a couple specific examples. One of the most challenging problems that we face is product market fit and timing. as well as both in terms of user expectations and product fit, and also timing with market trends and technology trends. And I'll actually share an example of where we made a bet that didn't go well, at least initially. And that was the decision to go with multi-tenant EPO cloud. So in McAfee, we have, we had a product called ePolicy Orchestrator. It's owned by Trellix now. ePolicy Orchestrator was a Windows server-based product that you could use to manage FireScan Enterprise and lots of other things. And we had, tens of millions of FireScan Enterprise users and, hundreds of thousands of these servers out there. I forget the exact numbers. Anyway, we were looking, and this was in, in Smitha, you were there for all this stuff. We were there in the early 2012, 13, 14. We were looking at the first of all, our very real success at offering total protection service. And customer feedback saying, we love total protection service, but we need it to be more advanced. It's, we're running into the limits of what it can do. We want to be able to do more elaborate policy and policy inheritance. We want to do, activation of different partner offerings. We want to be able to have, like proactive alerts. Remember that? So all of those things were standard in ePolicy Orchestrator and didn't exist in our SaaS offering, which, by the way, was built on Windows.NET Server. Think about that.
Yeah, yeah.
So we were also at the end of we were reaching the end of the useful life of the technology that service was built on.
Yep, yep.
And so one of the most important questions we faced was, do we build a multi-tenant SaaS right now in 2014 for ePolicy Orchestrator? Or do we make the bet that we should have a cloud-enabled instance of EPO that's very, very easy to deploy in AWS? Because at that time, AWS was still pretty new, but was growing fast. You could see that it was going somewhere. Yeah. And we made the decision to go with a multi-tenant SaaS. And it solved a lot of customer problems. We had great customer feedback, but not as huge a customer set as we would have liked, at least initially. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, while that happened, AWS, which was, and Azure, and then later GCP, which was prohibitively expensive, stopped being prohibitively expensive. And, by the late 2010s, it was clear that if you were going to, and I was actually at AWS at this time when this was happening, it was clear that if you wanted to deploy a fully integrated server platform for your enterprise, the way to do it would be to get an AMI and have, deploy it onto EC2 with, RDS, I guess, or the relational database service backend and a bunch of other stuff. Mm-hmm. And at the same time as our multi-tenant SaaS was, frankly, struggling to get more than, MVP adoption, it was getting easier and easier to deploy to AWS. So actually now, if you go to Trellix and say, I want to deploy EPO to AWS, it's a one button that's very easy. So they did solve that problem after you and I both left.
Yeah.
But we had to make a bet at that time. And yes, if I could do it differently, I would have gone the other way but you have to be, was I able to predict then that, AWS would get to the place where it was so easy to work with? Maybe not. So that's a lesson learned for future product management exercises, including what I'm doing right now. You have to be very well educated on not just your own product line, but the market trends out there that you depend on for growth and success. And so, I think there are some ways that now I could look at that and say, okay, there's a lot of things in the market right now today that we don't know where they're going to go. We don't know if they're going to be any good. Like there's so much AI out there that frankly is useless.
Yeah, we're going to get to that very soon.
And you have to bet, is it going to get useful or not, right? So those are interesting questions that we face today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one point I wanted to add to what you said is as we're, product managers make decisions all the time. Right, that's part of what we do, and
that's our job. We have to be able to make decisions.
That's right,
and you have to be a product owner and own those decisions, which is something that I think a lot of product owners struggle with, especially when they're new to the business. And so that's really, really crucial.
And the point I wanted to make was it's important. Product managers make decisions all the time. as much of those decisions as it can be data informed, the better.
That's right.
Because like the decision you made at the time to make ePolicy Orchestrator multi-tenant was based on the data you had at the time.
Absolutely.
And things that change, you have no control over that.
Correct. Yeah, you use the data you have and you use the customer input you have. I think we did a great job of getting customer input. That was something that I always advise product owners to, build my old boss, Reese Johnson, talked about building a nervous system. And I thought he was really smart with that. He said, he was later at Symantec and Blue Coat. But he shared, you want to build a nervous system of customers and partners that you can talk to when you're asking these kinds of questions. And we got good at that. We had a number of customers who would totally take our calls and give us guidance. And that's something that way you have numbers that come from usage and research, et cetera. But then you also have qualitative advice where a customer would say, well, I see that your research says that XYZ will work great, but I'd never use it. That's useful to hear.
That's absolutely useful to hear. So,
or vice versa, you see like something we remember Site Advisor, which was our web filtering capability. It was a very early web filtering capability in the browser.
Yeah.
And we got good feedback. It was interesting because, people were like, why'd you acquire that? But then, when customers got it, and this is back when you had plugins and Internet Explorer, so this is a long time ago. Back when customers got it, they were like, oh yeah, why did I never have that before? And so it was really great to get that kind of qualitative feedback that, yes, this solves a problem for me, whether or not your research says this is the next area to invest in.
Yep, makes sense. All right, you kind of brought up the AI question. It would be crazy in today's day and age if we didn't talk about AI.
Yeah, we have to talk about AI.
So tell me how Gen AI is changing what you do as a product manager and how it's affecting the products that you're building.
I mean, honestly, it hasn't had any effect on how I do product management because I don't trust the Gen AI services with my private data. I would never, ever, ever upload to ChatGPT or Gemini private data from a company that I work for unless I was working for OpenAI or Google. When I was working for Google, we did have Gemini betas that we could work with, but they didn't provide enough insight to be useful. So for a product manager, to me, I don't think it's really quite there. Now, you can use it for things like this. If you could trust it, and this is a different problem. Imagine that you had an instance of ChatGPT where you really believed the data privacy controls existed and were enforced around private data, which, I don't believe it for a second, because how do they train the data? It's across multiple users, right? But let's say that they did. If there were such trustable instances, then, and I think Anthropic is working on something like that, then it would be useful to use it, for example, to author documents that were easy to consume, to consolidate research notes, right? It doesn't solve intelligent problems, but it solves some dumb ones, right? Yeah. Like, let's say I have 1,000 pages of research notes that, 1,000's a lot of pages, but I don't know, over 5 years I might. Let's say I have 1,000 pages of research notes. And what I would like to do is compile those into useful takeaways, so that I can do some summaries and takeaways, so that I can do some prioritization. Absolutely. I would use that. I would use it for that. But would I use it to make a decision and prioritize things or decide where to invest? No, I can't imagine doing that.
Now, or at least you wouldn't rely only on that to make the decision.
You would never rely only on it. And I think this is where the AI hype has gotten ahead of the reality. It's like, think of it this way. When the power drill and the power screwdriver were invented, right? They're incredibly useful tools that every construction worker uses all day. Does it mean you don't need construction workers? Does it mean that you don't have architects? Of course not. They're tools, just the same as any other tool, like this video tool that we're using today, or like Microsoft Excel. So think of it that way, rather than think of it as some like general intelligence that's going to like take over the world. I don't believe that for a minute. I think it's just a set of tools. And like anything else, you have to use the right tool for the job. And if you use the wrong tool for the job, you can make some bad decisions. Like Google, for example, has gotten into big trouble, correctly, in my opinion, for using too much AI in search.
Yeah.
Because, well, why? Because they saw a threat from ChatGPT, and they thought, well, if people are using ChatGPT for search, well, we better do the same thing.
Right.
But and it's gotten better, but everybody has an experience of doing a Google search where the what comes up down the page is correct, and what shows up at the top is wrong, because because the product owner there was too trusting of something that was immature. So, but coming back to your point about product management and engineering and business planning, I think there are definitely opportunities in the same way that we use autocorrect and we use auto formula authoring in spreadsheets, and Jira can give you some capabilities where they automatically put things on Kanban boards and stuff like that. There are many, many cases where you can use it as a time-saving tool.
Yes.
But until the time that you don't have to think about correcting it all the time, which may never come, honestly.
Yep.
It's only so far that it can go.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like I can say like the places I've found it most useful is for summarization, to some extent BI, right? Like reporting.
BI is good.
Reporting is another area where I think it's gone through enough iterations that it's fairly reliable.
Right.
But you're absolutely right. When you're using Gen AI, you have to be careful about bias. You have to be careful about hallucination. There's so many things to keep in mind because, as a product manager, you're making a decision based on A, B, C, D, and E. And if all of it is based on Gen AI or some sort of AI tool, you better check before you say this is my decision, because that may be a very risky move.
Right. Well, you raise an interesting point about business intelligence too.
Yeah.
Which is, there's a lot of manual work and checking that both product managers and maybe you have a business analyst you work with, or maybe you don't. And automation can really help a lot of those tasks. One of the things that is always a challenge is when you have, a huge amount of, I don't know, let's say you have a year's worth of data from Salesforce and you're trying to figure out which partners are the most successful and which go-to-market channels are the most successful, and where do deals fall apart, right? You look at win-loss, like why did it fail here versus there?
Yeah. Yep.
Certainly, I don't think this is something you could author, some prompts for, but I think it would be interesting to use artificial intelligence as a way to get insights from those data. And then the other piece of it to me is, when you have business insights in a tool like in Salesforce, for example.
Yeah.
Salesforce gives you a million different, graphs and, summaries and extracts and you name it. Yep. One of the nice things about Salesforce is that you can always drill down, right? Here's a summary of, I don't know, my performance of my top partners, by region or something like that. Well, if I want to see the backup data, I can see it.
Right.
And to me, if I'm building anything for business intelligence or, like in roadmap planning, you want to be able to go into the Jira, you want to be able to go into the bugs and understand the detail behind it. That's really that's a sort of design advice for anyone. If you're building business intelligence tools with AI, do that so that as a consumer of it, I can trust but verify. I need to know the backup data, and I can't just have it be like a black box. Otherwise, I'll never use it.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. All right. So I know you read a lot of books. Any book recommendations that have helped you with your product management journey, or anything that you're just reading for fun right now that you'd like to share with our audience?
Sure. Well, I'll throw out one that I read long back, which was actually really helpful. There was a book called Business Model Generation. which I don't know if we were studying that when you were still at McAfee, or you might have already left. I think.
Yeah, I might have left.
It's a really helpful guide for building business models and for, sort of business planning when you're working in new markets, or when you're working with, new customer sets that you're not familiar with. And it has like kind of it has a really nice visual style, which is helpful because the way we typically do this is on a Miro board or on a whiteboard. So the book sort of is written that way. So in that world, have a look at business model generation, and it might be helpful I certainly look at it a lot when I'm thinking about how to plan, how to plan future business investments. In fact, I probably will be looking at it for Wind River before you know it. As far as just regular books that I'm reading, I've read so many books lately. I'm trying to remember which ones. Goodness. I'm reading right now a book called The Overstory. And I don't remember the name of the author, but he won the Pulitzer Prize, so it must be good. It is a very literary novel covering lots of different stories about trees in America, ranging from the old chestnuts to the old growth redwoods and the battles over logging. And it's great.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Kind of reminds me, my son, for my recent birthday, gave me a book that says it's titled Mountains of the Mind. And I was like, what is this about? It's actually a book about the evolution of how mountains have taken over, like the psyche, like the people, how they view mountains and climbing mountains, what used to be feared, how it's become an obsession. And I am guilty, as you know.
Mountains of the Mind. Yes.
Mountains of the Mind. I cannot remember the author either, but I will send it to you if you're interested.
The Overstory, I looked it up, is by Richard Powers, and he did win the Pulitzer Prize for it in 2019. So it's
lovely.
It's very pre-COVID, I will say that.
Awesome. Hey, so Andrew, it was absolutely lovely having you on this podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. I know, we've stayed in touch all these years. I wish you the best at Wind River. And I know we'll be talking soon. And again, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sounds great.
All right. Ciao.